Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first Modern Maker podcast. I'm Mathew Gnagy,
I'm Yannick Prüser.
and we're here today to get you in on the conversation. So thanks. We're going to try to make this a regular thing. I'm not sure what the frequency is going to be, but we'll see what happens. It's all new and interesting for us. So something to keep in mind is that the topics may be widely different from week to week. I think most people perceive the Modern Maker as a sewing brand, but we might talk about knitting, we might talk about lace, we might talk about the lifestyle of a creative academic trying to make it in the world. We might talk about anything. You don't even know. That's why it's interesting. But whatever we do, we're going to try to make sure you have great content to listen to. So without further ado, let's get on into it. How are you doing today, Yannick?
Quite well. A little bit sunburned. I have a sore throat. I had to present a local fencing group yesterday, and on the German version of a Ren fair, basically. And the moment we tried to start the presentation, somebody decided to beat their drums really loud. So I had to scream for like about an hour to like try to present this group. So yeah, I'm good, a little bit damaged, perhaps.
Well, you sound great. You look fine. So I think
Thank you.
Yeah. And for my part, it's been a really interesting week with a lot of ups and downs. I think my job has me running in circles right now, just trying to put out fires and figure out cleanup. But those of you who don't know, I'm the director of historical clothing and dress for Colonial Williamsburg, formerly known as the Costume Design Center. And that's what I do all week long, is kind of wade around in the muck and mire of the 18th century and 18th century clothes, and then lots of management to surround that. So it's really nice to have a break from that and to be able to do this podcast and talk about some early modern things and other creative endeavors. The next segment, what we want to have kind of the first segment after we say our hellos, is what's on my table. And that's really, what are we working on right now? What are our goals? How many projects do we have going at once? Because I'm one of those people that usually has way too many. So let's get into that. Yannick, what's on your table?
So I'm working for the Historical Museum in Hanover right now, and we're basically doing some research and examining some late 16th century garments. This has been going on for some years already, and we're getting closer publishing our work next year. And yesterday we actually started putting out the patterns we took during the last month. So now you can basically download all of those patterns we've taken and just use them for whatever you like. And I've been writing the texts, the notes, helping people to basically work with the garments, knowing how's everything like going together. And yeah, that's on my table, just writing, spreading the word, spreading the patterns, so that people just know that they can download them and use them, because it's not something museums generally do. So it's important for people to know.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Since it's being put out to the public, I kind of feel that there may be a downloadable, printable Modern Maker version of those patterns at some point in the future. We'll see. We'll see what happens. If it weren't being made public, I would probably feel less comfortable with that. But since it's public patterns from an extant garment, I think that should be within the Creative Commons world. So those of you who are watching, look forward to that. That could be really fun. What's on my table right now? I've got, of course, too many projects. You can see in the background, oops, sorry, over here, you can see this sweater behind me that I still need to finish. And I am going to be showing this sweater to the curator of a museum that has sort of the Swedish original versions of these sweaters in its collection. And that'll be happening in just a few weeks when I go to Sweden next. That's gonna be really fun. I probably won't have the sweater done by the time I go. And while that's embarrassing, it still looks pretty cool. So I'm proud to show it to her. We'll see what her reaction is, because the ones that they have in Sweden are very specific to their patterns, and mine is a creative new version. So we'll see what they think. Should be
I'm sure it will be fine.
yeah. Other things that are on my table, I have 2 doublets that are in progress right now. I have, of course, the 16th century peas cod belly doublet that is sort of taken after the Portrait of the Tailor by John Battista Moroni, and that one I'm shooting for my YouTube videos. So we're in the kind of final stretch, and this is the final of 3 videos which have already been put out. And I started shooting last night. I finally got all my lighting back in place again. I finally have my house in a situation where I can actually feel comfortable shooting. And that's a really good feeling, because I've been sort of out of practice for a while. And in addition to that, I'm still working on the doublet that I will wear on the cover of the revised edition of the Modern Maker Volume 1. And that one I've been doing on live stream on YouTube, or pardon me, on Instagram, but I haven't done a whole lot of it recently because I've been so busy. I've had guests, and then I've had ups and downs in life, and I haven't been able to hit the record button so that I could go live. Anyway, that's what's on my table. Too much stuff, not enough time to do it, and just the pressure is something I actually like, so it feels good. It's nice.
So you think it actually helps you finishing it?
I do. When I have too much on the table, then I prioritize what's important, and then I actually get things done, which is fun. It's nice to be getting back into the Modern Maker. I think I've taken a long enough break now. It's been nearly 2 years since I put out like regular content, and I feel like I'm building back up, and I've got my excitement again, and that's really important. So
Great.
In the comments below, all of you guests watching this, please tell us what you're working on. I think it's a great thing to just share what's happening. And if you have specific questions that we can address in our next video, please let us know.
Sure.
Yeah. So the next segment that I have listed here is what have you learned recently? But I kind of feel like maybe we could talk about like research theory or concepts rather than specific things that we've learned. All right, everyone. So we're still trying to figure out what all of the different segments are going to be in this, or maybe we don't even need to have them. I don't know. I'm such an old school like TV or radio show person that I think in terms of segments. So hopefully we're not going to bore you. But the next one we're going to talk about is, I have it labeled as what have you learned recently? And I think we're going to use that as kind of a jumping off point to talk more about sort of the theory of doing the research that we do and the way we think about the processes and the choices that we make. So, for example, when I'm approaching one of the Spanish tailor's manuals and I'm trying to understand a pattern draft to use it, because the patterns aren't all perfectly clear, because there's not notations around every single side, it can be difficult to determine like where should I pull a proportion from to try to make something that's usable. Most of these things would have been absolutely common knowledge in the time period, and you'd be trained into it, so it shouldn't be that hard for you to figure out if you were a period person. But we're modern people, so it's a little bit more complicated to try to figure out what is the actual neckline measurement, because it can't be the proportion that's actually there. So why is it different, et cetera, et cetera. For me, that has everything to do with looking at extant pieces, looking at patterns that other people have taken off of extant pieces, and then making a comparison on those measurements in proportion to the body of the garment itself, and then deciding what that means in relation to the pattern that I'm trying to analyze from a historical garment. And some of it is just body proportion, like human bodies are consistent across all centuries in very specific ways. So it's easy to say like, well, a neck is a neck when compared to the chest, and a shoulder is usually about yay long. And it's pretty easy to make those determinations. But if I get too fast and loose with that without checking on proportions from surviving garments, then I can make mistakes. And I've done that before, and I've written about them extensively. What's your experience, Yannick?
I mean, the biggest problem basically is if you don't have anything to compare it. Well, like we already talked about it several times, but the Hosen, I had the honor, the chance to research, to examine some months ago. Like I had the opportunity to like take measures, take photos and everything, but there's really not that much out anywhere that I could use as a comparison, that I could use as like a help. How should it look like? How it is normally done? Like we have the three Swedish Pluderhosen from the Sture family, and that's it. And so you just have these pieces to look at, and that's it. And that's quite complicated because you have nothing to rely on, nothing to trust. You have to like produce everything yourself, all theories. You have to trust your measurements. You have to try out the patterns and you have to try out if it works or not. And nobody's really helping you. That's easier if there's a lot of comparison material out there.
Yeah, it's a lot of experimentation and a lot of trying to make a determination of what is a good fit, and without really having a true understanding of what the fit is. That can be complicated.
And the problem is if you're wrong, but you're still putting it out there, it might basically ruin it for the next generations, because most people don't get the chance to like measure extant garments themselves. So if you are the one doing it, you kind of need to be right, or many people will believe you even though you're wrong, and it will make it even harder for them to like doing research because they're relying on your mistakes. So it's always a bit of pressure when you're doing something that it hasn't been done before.
It's absolutely true. I mean, we're kind of going through a new renaissance in terms of early modern stays all the way through 18th century stays, right? Like in the 1980s and 90s, when patterns of fashion came out and we had this wonderful set of stays from the Volksgräfin outfit that lives in, is it Munich? Maybe? I can't remember which museum it is in now, sorry. But, you know, that set of stays, you know, our understanding of how stays were supposed to fit was based on our understanding of corsets from the 19th century. And they're apples and oranges in terms of how they fit and what they do. So I've come across this at Colonial Williamsburg as well, like the old way that people used to conceptualize the fit of stays was very much connected to corsetry that came a couple hundred years after. So trying to backtrack that and retool that and try to really understand how they worked and what they did for the time period and how they were supposed to feel and function, that's a crucial element. A lot of those things, though, I will say I tend to take a very practical approach when I'm thinking about those things, like how something is supposed to fit. I will be really honest. I think that as modern people in the 21st century wearing mass-produced clothing that isn't custom tailored to our bodies, we are 100% comfortable with really bad fit, right? We're so used to things being uncomfortable that when they're fit right, we're not even sure if that's correct. And so when you think about, you know, living in a time period where things weren't mass produced and they're going on your body and everything is custom tailored to fit you, then you have to think, okay, I shouldn't really notice it on my body that much because it's custom fit, so it should fit beautifully. Then on top of that, it needs to be incredibly mobile because these people were, in my opinion, much more physical than we are on a day-to-day basis. So it can't be incapacitating in any way whatsoever. And this then goes back to my conversation about stays, in that, you know, women were being compressed into these things where you know, when I say women were being compressed, I'm talking about modern women trying to reproduce historical garments, and they're being compressed in ways that are not indicative of the time period. So they can't breathe very well. It's not particularly good for the breasts to be squashed in the way that they're getting squashed. The waists might be pulled too tight. Like everything is just not a comfortable, mobile, functional fit. And I think that element right there, the functional side of it, I think is what people tend to forget in favor of making something is more like a costume, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same with early 16th century Hosen, for example, because I know many people are like really afraid of making them just because they look like breeches, you know, they look like trousers, but they are made in such a different way, basically. They fit so different from modern trousers that it's really hard to grasp how exactly are they supposed to fit. Like, does it feel right when it feels like, don't know, like, do the breeches I just did, do they feel right? And you can't trust your feelings because you don't know how it should feel. And yeah, I think it needs a lot of experience and a lot of time before you really can trust your feelings in this.
I
Like,
completely agree. The last thing that I'll say before handing it over to you for a minute is one of the key ingredients for me when I'm trying to figure out how something is supposed to fit is looking at paintings and portraiture, because particularly paintings of casual settings where, you know, a painter is painting someone at work or painting, you know, a village street scene or something, because then what you see is you see really clearly how things wrinkle. And I think that's the most important element for me is not so much how tight it is to the body. Most people, when, you know, I've talked about this before in my books, but most people, when they start making these things, their goal is they're thinking about it like a costume, and costume in general is fit a little bit too tightly to the body because you need to eliminate shadows for stage lighting and for set lighting when it's film and television. But when you look at real clothes, I mean, even the clothes that I'm wearing right now, right? Like there's wrinkles here, and that's very real. We don't even notice them. It's a actually quite a well-fit shirt, but it still has wrinkles in it, and yet it's also quite comfortable. So recognizing what the wrinkles are supposed to be and making sure that you don't get away from that is also I think a very large element in understanding what the fit should be.
yes. I mean, you can't really go around the sources. You need to look at extant depictions of people. You need to read if there's written evidence. I mean, literature is fine, but it's always a modern interpretation. Like, even if I'm writing something and I'm confident with it, it's just my modern perspective. And I can be transparent about it and tell people, okay, this is just my opinion, but I can't really prevent this from happening. I can't be perfect. And so, again, literature is fine and we need it, but you need to look at pictures, at portraits. You can't really prevent it in any way.
No, you can't. But if you are going to use the written word as part of your research, it's best to have things that are written in the time period about clothes. And then you get a much more accurate historical perspective on the fit, function, color, and cultural significance of different elements of dress. And I think one of the things, at least in more recent years, I think that people are being really good about looking for written resources from those time periods specifically.
Yeah.
I have a very hard time trusting a lot of academic literature about clothes, especially from 19th and 20th century, because I feel like I feel like lots of it was more common to make assumptions about the way things worked. But now, because of the internet, we have access to so much more information and data. I think that assumptions have to be more carefully drawn. I think that any academic should be quite clear about the fact that it is not really possible to know beyond a doubt what is true for the time period. It's very, very difficult. And so I'm always very cautious of anyone that I read that says, this is how it was done, because then I feel like they're not being honest as an academic who very well knows that they don't have all the information.
Yes. And another problem kinda is that there's just not that much literature out there about, for example, 16th and 17th century menswear. Like, most people need to rely on books that were written in the 19th century, in the 20th century. Most of the famous books we have are pretty old. Like, there isn't that much from the recent decades or from the recent years you can use. Like Karl Köhler's book, for example. Like, people still use it, people still read it, and it's still pretty hot stuff, basically. But it's really, really old, and it's not that good. And but I mean, what else can you use? Like there just isn't that much out there anyway, so why not use that? And so we basically need more literature and better literature, like updated versions of older works, perhaps. But yeah, somebody has to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that's our job, right? That's what you and me and Jane and Ninya from Tudor Taylor and Jenny Tiramani with the museums and the historical School of Historical Dress, like that's the task that we have all been set, is to
Yeah,
write these books. I can't forget Marion McNeely and her cohorts with the Drei Schnittbücher, because
yes,
you know they're doing for German and Austrian clothing what Altsega and all of those manuals and what I've done with Spanish clothing, and I think that's fantastic. The more detail we can get out of those manuals, the better, because it helps us understand the early modern period and the cut of clothes, while simultaneously people are trying to, you know, dig up information about the clothing culture itself and what significance different things had.
yeah. But I mean, as you said, like if we imagine that we didn't have the Drei Schnittbücher and then the publication by McNeely, like how much would be missing? Like this is such an important work, basically. If it wasn't there, like this is like many people are using this for German garments and there's no alternative. So
But
that's what I
well,
please.
but Drei Schnittbücher, you mean?
Exactly. Like just these three books change so much, and that's what I mean when I say like we need more updated literature. We need more people like looking at the sources and putting them out there for everybody to understand, like in edited versions, for example, because it's not like we have 100 sources and 100 pieces of literature so everybody can freely choose. Like we really rely on these small pieces we can get.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we need to do now also is we need to start looking for this kind of research and these kinds of books in other languages. Like all the books you and I are talking about, for the most part, are English language books.
Yes.
Written about historical clothing. But it can't just be English speaking people that have been fascinated by it. So, you know, I have my experience with Sweden, and I'm finding that Sweden is quite insular. And so there's not a lot of outreach. So even if there are fantastic books written on historical dress in Swedish, they're not something that we would ever come in contact with, because they're old. They're just as old as the English books that we're talking about, and they're hard to find. And you also have a culture that has focused on traditional dress more than historical dress, even though I know that both of those things are written and they go hand in hand. So you know, the future is bright, and there's lots of places for us to dig. And one of the things that I have to check myself on is that I always feel like every time I try to move the modern maker forward, I always get kind of frustrated. Like, I've been making the same kind of doublet for 25 years. It's what new thing am I going to say about, you know, this style of garment? And the truth is, maybe not a whole lot, but I can always look for a different style of garment from a different country and start focusing on that. And
Yeah, true.
that's one of the things that's coming.
And I
So,
mean, right now, I think we're kind of lucky. I mean, many museums are starting to be a bit more open about what they have in their vaults, basically. So many garments are being revealed right now. So I think it's a bit easier, and it will be a bit easier during the coming years, just to like looking at stuff, for example, like to get more sources. So I'm actually quite optimistic.
so am I. I mean, one of the things that's very true, which I think is fascinating, is that clothing related content is really popular. So when
Absolutely.
you look at a museum that's wanting to get clicks, talking about the clothes in that museum gets lots of clicks. People are fascinated by old clothes. Television shows like, you know, like Bridgerton, the Elizabeth movies, Outlander, all of these modern media related Hollywood kinds of things are getting people interested, and they're digging and they're looking. And then you have places like Pinterest, which are link aggregates. And because there's so many of us that like to play with these kinds of things, and there's so many links to follow, some of them good, some of them not so good.
Yeah.
But I think that museums are starting to understand that if they want to have relevance, they have to go where the clicks are. And people really like clothes. They like
Yeah.
weapons. They like clothes. They like weapons, and they like stuff. It's more than just paintings, right? Museums are
Yeah.
great for paintings, but it's the objects, the material culture that people connect to because it's something that they could handle and think about themselves using.
I mean, we just noticed this when we published the patterns yesterday. Like the clicks on a website really spiked. Like you could really see how people were like, okay, I need to see this. I'm like many people were grateful that we just put it out instead of hiding it behind a paywall. So there are people interested. You just need to like give them access.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely understand that sentiment too, because a couple of years ago, I made all my content free and public and accessible and stopped having the paywall. I still have, a significant number of people who believe in my work that want to give me $5 or $10 every month, and that's fantastic. But I felt that it was more advantageous to just open the door and let everyone in.
And I mean, it's not a problem making money with your work, especially if you like yourself spend a lot of time and money doing that kind of research. But there's a difference between monetizing your work and hiding everything behind a paywall just because you know people would pay for it. So, I mean, we are writing a book about the garments and you will be able to buy that. But if you don't want to buy that or don't have the money, you can still just go to the website and download the original patterns and look through the articles, and you still have access. Like we're not hiding the piece from the public.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And that's amazing and fantastic. And that's how it should be.
No.
In my opinion, that's how it should be. Like, what benefit is it to people if you try to hide everything behind a door? This actually kind of leads right into the next segment that I'm wanting to do, and this is, I want to call this the hot topic. We probably should find a better term for this segment, but this is one of those moments where we might talk about something really controversial or try to brainstorm about what our world needs next, right? So today, the question that I have is, what is missing in the historical dress sewing world? What would be the next level if we would brainstorm this and like think about how would people, what would be the next level of access for people, right? So originally it was Janet Arnold and the Patterns of Fashion books and various other books written even earlier than that. Some fantastic things that people could use to do better research than they did before. And then the internet came into being, and now we have access to so much more imagery, online museums, and access to patterns that those museums have taken. And then people like me are putting patterns out into the world. And what would be the next level? Like, would it be the kind of thing that you're working on where it's an individual's whole closet that we can examine and like think about who they were and what those clothes meant to them? There's not that many caches of clothing that are like that.
No, that's true. Like, I don't know, I think we need more networking, basically, like more connections, because in most cases, I think the people are still like working for themselves, like doing their own research and then publishing it. And like, I can only speak for myself, but I've profited a lot just from talking to people. I've talked to the School of Historical Dress while doing my research. I've talked to very friendly people in Denmark. I've talked to you, for example, like, and I've learned so much. And I could just not have done that. I could just have like sat in front of my laptop and just read articles and writing my stuff, and it would be fine, but it wouldn't be nearly as good as it is now, just because people around me know so much stuff. And so why not talk to them? Why not sharing what I know? Why not like listening to what they know? And I think everybody would profit from that. And that's still missing a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not sure where we would go on the next level. I mean, it almost would be like the best thing, actually very similar, I think, to what your museum has been doing is that you take a 3D scan of the garment and it reads the seams and the placement and the state of the garment itself, and then you can extrapolate the pattern shape based off of that. But it's a lot more, I don't know, it's a lot more accurate to the truth of the garment as it sits in the museum versus a lot of the patterns which there's more generalization in the lines and how they've moved and aged and decayed.
Yeah. But I think generally like stuff like 3D scans is really important, just because in some decades or centuries these garments will be gone, at least most of them. Like you can't really keep them together forever. So you just need to do as much as you can with them right now. Like scan them, take the patterns, take as many photos as you can, because sometimes at some point, basically, it will be over. So you need to do it now.
In terms of what the modern maker can do to offer like the next level, I think that's something that I've been pondering, because of course I'm thinking about growth and thinking about expanding my reach a little bit more, since I pulled in for so many years and now I'm trying to open up again. And I think one of the most complicated things I see is skills in pattern making, and people it's something that is hard to learn from anywhere, because everybody teaches it differently, and every time period has a different kind of pattern making that goes into it. And everywhere I turn, I see people that have difficulty with their clothes because the pattern isn't right. And so how do we get more information out into the world about pattern making and teach people pattern making and teach people the concepts in pattern making? Because even beyond just the skill of doing it and putting it on the paper, what I see is a lot of people that are taught a singular method that may or may not work for what they want. And once again, it becomes that one-way mentality. And you know how I feel about that. It drives me crazy. So how do we teach people to relax and understand the concepts of fitting the body and how that relates to your pattern making system, and then how that relates to the extant garment? There's so many levels to it. I mean, personally, I've learned probably a dozen different pattern making methods over the years that don't necessarily have much to do with each other, but every one of those has informed how I make patterns. And every time I make one, I do something new, and it becomes its own organism.
Yeah. I mean, you can't really do anything except of trying to make it accessible as good as you can, because I mean, most people don't have the time or the energy, I think, to like put immense amounts of work into learning how to make patterns. Like, I think many people want to, but you need the resources. So I think you can just offer it in the easiest way you can basically make it. But I mean, what else can you do?
It's true.
I mean, and then
for me, go ahead, please.
I mean, and that's what you're already trying to do for years by now. I mean, you're trying to make it as easy as possible while keeping the period silhouettes and the feel of the original garments. So, and I think many people just don't know that it works like that, that you can like do it relatively simple by your method. But I think that just needs time, basically, to reach everybody.
So in that vein, then, one of the things that I offer is a downloadable pattern that you can print and tape together and then cut out your size and then make a garment from it. And that's something that's very popular these days, because most independent designers and pattern makers have them. The difficulty for me is that I love making the pattern, but I hate writing the instructions. And when it comes to historical clothes, there's instructions everywhere, right? There's books written about how the interiors are made. I've written books about how to do the interiors. And what I kind of want to do is just start developing patterns and then just put a reference for like, this is where you can find instructions on how to build it. And that way I don't have to like have a second PDF full of instructions that are basically copies of what's already in my books. So, or what's in my videos that people can access for free. So I have so many patterns that I want to just release, but I think I need affirmation from the public that I don't have to put instructions in them.
I think it kind of depends on what you want people to do with them. Like if you want them to do like perfect copies of extant garments, of course you need the instructions to be there. Like you need excessive instructions. But if you just want people to give them, like if you just want to give them a shape, a pattern to work with, to freestyle basically, I think it's enough to like give some basic informations about how to assemble the pieces. I mean, you're not trying to make people produce copies of extant garments.
Not at
You
all.
want them to freestyle. So I think it's okay the way you imagined it, just like putting the patterns out.
Yeah. Well, and the other part of me is like I've made so much content over the years that pretty much every pattern I put out, there's probably a video related to it already on my YouTube channel. So everyone, look forward to that. I'm going to be releasing a bunch more patterns in the near future. And I think the nice thing about not having to make the instructions and having the secondary PDF is it actually makes the patterns less expensive and financially makes them more accessible to more people. Like if I'm just developing a pattern in Illustrator and putting it out, why would I need to charge more than like $12 for something like that? I really don't need to. You know,
Yeah.
so then that makes it much more accessible to a lot more people. And that's important to me.
It is.
So, you know, my goal is for people to have an easier time getting close to the correct fit for them. That's what I want those patterns to be, is I'm concerned about them making the garment for their body in a way that feels comfortable for them, right? So yeah, making an exact replica is not going to fly because you have to make that garment for a different person than the original was made for. And, you know, we don't know what alterations or, you know, changes were made during the original construction process that have led to like vestigial stitching somewhere. Like there's this stitching here, but we don't know why. And is that because it was an alteration that changed? Is it something missing from the garment that we don't know because it was taken out at some point? So there's all of these questions that have to be asked. But in the end, most people who are using my patterns are trying to make them so that they can go to events, so that they can look good and feel good in their clothes. And that's really my goal. I mean, quite aside from I'm also a businessman and I would love for people to just buy them. But beyond that, I think I'm not selling something that people can't use. Like it has to be as usable as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this kind of leads right into the next section. It's called the uplift, and it's all about following your passions and finding the direction that you want to go. So this is sort of where we talk about the lifestyle side of being this kind of person and being this kind of maker. And there's a lot of us out there. You know, people always tell me, oh, Mathew, what you do is so unique. And I'm like, but really, it's not. Like, I have a creative job. I have developed a creative life on purpose. It is not impossible to have this life with children. I have friends that lead very similar lives and they have children of all varying ages and they still do it. So, you know, this is where we kind of talk about how this work fits into our life. I'm going to let you start because you're kind of at the beginning of your career and I think it's fascinating. And I want to hear your thoughts about you know, sort of being young and moving forward. I'm old. I've been doing this for a while. So it's your turn.
Oh, it's actually hard to put this into words because I kind of stumbled into this, like the whole museum project, for example. I mean, it's not like I was casted or anything. It's not like I'm a professional that was hired. I was just an interested amateur, basically. And I talked to them and they talked to me and they were interested in what I was doing and I was generally interested in what they were doing. So I was just absorbed by the project along the way. So, but I think that could be just something, a good motivation. Like just talk to people. If you're interested in something, just like talk to the people that are like responsible for this. And for me, it worked great. Just like reaching out and trying to connect and just like, in my case, it worked pretty well. Like I never had such a great chance before to like look at extant garments, work with patterns, like write articles and stuff. And it's kind of hard to concentrate on the rest of my life sometimes. Like I still have work to do. And this is so fascinating to me, like the whole project right now, that it's sometimes kind of hard to not like hyper focus but
Right.
I'm trying. So, but yeah, it was more of a coincidence that I'm where I'm now. So, but this happens. So just try it out. Just follow your dreams.
Yeah, I mean, and that's right there. I mean, that seems so cliche, but it's actually really great advice. One of the things, and I find people in Europe are a little bit more flexible about when something happens like that they just go with it. And they're like, hey, this is a great experience. I've seen this in Sweden, I've seen it in Germany with you, and I've seen it in Spain as well. Like, oh, a thing has happened to me where I have access to these things and I can follow this dream. Well, let's go for it. Whereas in America, one of the biggest problems that we have, I think, is our culture of doubt, where like if it's something good that's coming your way, you're like, nah, that can't possibly be true. Or you're focusing so much on the fact that like I can't give energy to that because I'm working so hard to do these 10 other things to keep my life going, that passion and the value of pursuing that passion is so marginalized that people often don't follow the path that would make them the happiest. And that's really sad. And I think that's one of the reasons why, at least here in America, if I may be so bold, I've kind of gotten a little bit more iconic status, is because I've always lived my life where I'm like, no, this is what I want to do. I'm going to follow it. And the times in my life, people who have watched me for the last 20 years doing this have noticed that when I don't follow my passion and I start focusing on, I have to have a good job, I have to make money, I have to do all of these things, I have to be a contributing adult, then I'm really unhappy and miserable. And then I stop producing content. And then they're like, are you okay? And and that's a good question. Like, why would you deny yourself the pursuit of your passions? There's ways to do it that don't cost any money. There's ways to manage your time so that you can have time to pursue them. And I think that if that's one message we get out in this podcast, is don't say no to the things that make you feel alive.
Yes,
It's so
exactly.
important. It's weird that the things that make us feel alive are ancient things that are dead and gone, but it's still, I mean, it's what motivates us, and I think that's important.
Yes. I mean, you can't really choose your passion anyway. It just comes to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an element that I try to infuse into most of my teaching, although a lot of my online classes, I'm so focused on giving content and making sure that I've said everything that I need to say for the class, that I often don't get to talk about the pursuit of happiness side of it until the end. And then, oh, I'm going to hang around for 15 extra minutes after class and just talk about this element. But yeah, I think the pandemic really taught us all how much we need to focus on making sure we're happy, so that when everything comes crashing to a halt, we have those things to make us happy. Please keep pursuing your passions, especially if this is your passion. Like, we're here for you, and we're going to do more of these podcasts and talk about more things. I think I've tried to cram too much into one episode. We'll see how the editing goes. But then, of course, now here's the big sales pitch side of it, because I am also a businessman. Just so that you know, the Modern Maker Schoolhouse website is something that exists. And if you don't know about it, it is themodernmaker.co. Here's a link that I put right on the screen so that you can see it. Well, it might not be a real link. It's just going to be the website, but there should be a link in the comments below. And then all of my books, the 5 books that I've written, are available through Amazon.com. And those books range from knitting to sewing to pattern making and just analysis and thinking about historical clothing. So you can go to Amazon.com and just look up Mathew Gnagy. This is how you spell it. And then finally, one of the things that I am offering again, which I had pulled off of the market for a while because of my availability, but I can be hired as a personal coach or instructor for you to learn more about tailoring. If you are developing a business that is similar to this, where you have a marketable skill that you want to go places with, I actually know how to get those things rolling. I know a good deal about the social media side of it, but I also know about the explorative side of it, so that I can teach you how to position your mind so that you can find the right things to push at. So there's different educational packages that you can purchase if you want. So please tap me as a resource. I am available. Yes, of course, it costs money. Everything does these days, but it's well worth it. I think during the pandemic, one of my favorites was a client out in California that was taking the pandemic to learn pattern making so that she could turn her designs into fashion product, just modern fashion clothes that she would then have manufactured and begin to sell. I haven't checked in with her lately, but she seemed like she was really going in a good direction when we finished. And she's not the first that I've helped in that way. So whether it's modern fashion, whether it's lace making, whether it's knitting or sewing, please give me an email and let's see what we can do. All right, there, I'm done with my commercial now. All right, thank you everyone so much. This has been the Modern Maker podcast with Yannick Prusa and Mathew Gnagy, and more to come soon. Thank you everyone. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Take care.